Good morning. It's Reverend Mike Capron from the First Presbyterian Church of Elmwood Park. This is the second in a series based in part on Andrew Root's book, Churches in the Crisis of Decline. 2 weeks ago, I shared with you about a hypothetical church, St. John the Baptist. And I reminded you that there are two qualities we can use to talk about churches. Vitality is the church's sense of being alive and vibrant. Prayer flows easily. People grow in their faith. There is spiritual energy in worship. People smile easily. They also weep at each other's troubles. The second quality is viability. This is more about numbers. Are the dollars coming in similar to the dollars being spent? Does the building suit the congregation's mission? Are enough new members joining to offset those we lose by death or moving away or fading away? It is that members thing which is our concern in the First Presbyterian Church of Elmwood Park. We are a church that is vital, but may not be viable, and we have some choices to make about that in the coming months. So back to this sort of hypothetical composite of many churches Andy Root has worked with. By the time of its final service in 2018, St. John the Baptist has neither of those qualities. It is not viable, and it is also not vital. It is a hollow shell. And what Andy Root does for the most of the rest of the book is to spin the clock backwards to the year 2011 and see how things might have gone a little differently. In 2011, at least at the beginning of the year, Luke is the pastor of the church. He is the one who changed the church name to Thrive in hopes of attracting the new young adults moving into the gentrifying neighborhood. Pastor Luke was all about viability. He had an ambitious vision for the future of his church, and he probably did think of it as his church. He wanted Thrive to become a high-tech, multi-campus, doctrinally correct happening place that people and dollars flowed into. What about the people who were in the church when he started his pastorate? Their only real purpose was to help Pastor Luke achieve his vision, to provide the resources to move forward toward this glorious goal of a big modern church. That is what happens when you focus on viability and forget about vitality. The present time becomes unimportant. Some churches that are obsessed with viability turn toward the past, the good old days, vainly seeking to recreate them. Such churches drown in nostalgia, and they certainly don't attract any new members who weren't around for those imagined good old days. But Pastor Luke has a vision for the future. He ignores the present and lives only in his dreamt of future. The big church, the thriving church with thousands of members. And if he has to steamroller a few old church members to make it happen, well, you have to break a few eggs to make an omelet. Now, to be fair to Luke, he did have supporters who believed in his vision, or who at least appreciated his energy. But the problem with living in the future is that you have to transfer or sacrifice your energy from the present forward into the future. And you have to believe that it is worth it. You know, some families manage to do this in a healthy, constructive way. For example, there are many stories about immigrants who work multiple jobs to get their children into college in hopes of a better life. And sometimes those things work out wonderfully. But it's harder in churches. The future keeps accelerating, and you feel like you can't keep up. And intense people like Luke don't have any way to motivate their congregation except through fear and anger. Listen, people, if we don't achieve this vision, then we will die. And if you aren't on board with my plan, you just better get out of the way. Luke probably didn't see the way his own energy for life was being drained. It is no real surprise that he was only able to keep this up for 3 years or so before he left for a non-denominational church that already had multiple campuses. He never really explained his reasons for leaving to St. John the Baptist, but some of them read the newsletter of his new church, where he claimed he couldn't serve any longer in a denomination that had turned so far in a liberal direction. Personally, I think that statement dodges the real reasons, which were not entirely his fault. The leaders who called Luke to St. John the Baptist had certain qualifications in mind. Pastor Luke was not hired because of his ability to speak a word from God. Rather, he was hired because of his vision for drawing younger populations to the church. This vision was based in innovation, entrepreneurship, not transcendence. The whole idea violated what Andy Root tells us about the church, that the church cannot produce its own life. The life of the church comes from God, and any attempt to bypass that truth will lead to destructive idolatry, futility, and exhaustion. I'll tell you another word that indicates that a church is stuck in the future: relevance. Whenever people start talking about how the church needs to become relevant, there is a good chance that someone is about to go barreling toward the future down a dead-end street. It is true that the church needs to love people as they are, and to love them, you need to know who they are and what their life is like, and in some way respond to that. But the phrase, "the church needs to be relevant," puts too much emphasis on the church. It assumes that the church is the star of its own story, and that what happens to the church is somehow more important than it probably actually is. Really, the church is no more than a supporting actor in God's story. Can you imagine two people getting married where one of them makes this vow? "I promise to be relevant to your life and marshal my resources to help you out of your troubles." That is a far cry from declaring your unconditional love for richer, for poorer, in sickness and in health, until death do us part. The church doesn't need to be relevant. It just needs to love. That love may or may not bring viability, but it definitely brings vitality. And we are going to start engaging that part of the story right now. It is 2011. Pastor Luke has resigned. He's been gone a few weeks. Some older members who had stopped coming start coming back. I'm going to devote most of the rest of this sermon to reading about some of those people. Now, in our worship this morning, we're reading an interesting little passage from 1 Samuel 9. And the only thing I really want to say about that passage is that God is doing things that nobody knew about. God was working in the life of a young man named Saul, who was going to become Israel's first king. And because of some lost donkeys, he goes and meets Samuel. And Samuel has been told by God that God is sending him somebody, that he's going to anoint his king. And God was working through these people going about their everyday lives outside of any church or temple. And that is really the primary message I want you to take today as you enjoy what I'm going to read from Andy's book, to see how God was working through some other people in this alternate telling of St. John the Baptist in 2011. The silver lining in this painful summer of transition after Luke left was that a few of the older members who had quietly disappeared during Luke's tenure returned. One was 85-year-old Jean. As a young woman, Jean had given money for the stained glass, working extra hours at the factory. She was one of the last living souls who had placed those beautiful panels of remembrance on the church walls. She had lost her husband, her high school sweetheart, in France in the World War II. When she was pregnant, he left for the war, never to return. St. John the Baptist saw her through. The church helped with her newborn while she worked. Out of gratitude and grief, she gave what to her was a significant amount to have her Harry placed in the stained glass and remembered. Now, in June 2011, she was back, sitting in the third row, straight across from Harry's panel. An oxygen tube connected her to a metal canister. Through June and July, she came every week, even attending the midweek Bible study. One Wednesday night in early August, she told the Bible study in a matter-of-fact way, and to their surprise, that hospice would be coming to her house that week. She revealed that she had been battling lung cancer for over a year, and it was now the end. She grieved that she'd be leaving her house more than she grieved her impending death. She had lived there over 70 years. Yet, she'd chosen to pass the house along to her youngest grandson, Philip. He'd bounced between colleges and dead-end jobs, and at one point even found himself with some drug troubles. Philip was always full of ideas, but short on follow-through. Philip had convinced Jean to allow him to move in with her, and Jean had imagined that she would be taking care of him. Even at 24, he seemed to be a child in need of being taken care of. But Jean's cancer diagnosis changed everything, and radically so. Something flipped in Philip. Philip was now taking care of his grandma, driving her to appointments, overseeing her medication, calling doctors. Jean told the Bible study that she sometimes even thanked God for her cancer because it gave Philip a purpose and produced a bond between them as strong as any Jean had ever known. She told the Bible study, "I haven't felt this cared for by someone since Harry left and never returned from the war." Philip was exactly the kind of young adult that Pastor Luke was trying to reach but never could. Philip pieced together 2 half-time jobs, 15 hours a week in the bike shop and another 15 to 20 hours a week in a neighborhood coffee shop. But Philip's true passion was trivia. Teddy's Tacos had a Tuesday night trivia contest with half-off tacos. And Philip never missed and never failed to help his team place, winning free drinks and free tacos. Most weeks, particularly after the cancer diagnosis, Jean could be spotted at Philip's side, surrounded by young adults huddled for answers. Jean was the trivia team's go-to for 1930s and 40s movies. In the decade before Philip arrived, Jean had slowly been fading away, disappearing, forgotten, overlooked by her neighborhood and congregation. She was dying before she was dying, losing life, losing vitality, if you will. Searching for a reason to live. But now that she was truly dying, the cancer eating the life out of her, she came alive. With Philip at her side, she became the queen of trivia night. Philip called Grandma Jean their good luck charm. As the summer slid into the dog days of late August, it was over. First, her seat was empty on Sunday. Then she was absent on Wednesday night. Finally, Jean's son called Bert with the news that Jean had died. A funeral needed to be planned. Bert was a 55-year-old African-American man. He ran a successful law firm in the neighborhood and had been a member of St. John the Baptist since he was a child. Now at this late stage in his career, he found himself stepping into pastoral ministry, even if just for a short time. That summer, Bert did most of the preaching and pastoral care. There were just too many Sundays to fill with pulpit supply. He didn't lead the funeral, but he helped make the arrangements, and it was a moving funeral for Jean. Bert felt the heaviness as he realized that Jean was one of the last of the ladies from the generation who gave the church the stained glass. Nevertheless, the funeral had the feeling of a somber celebration. Luke's departure gave the congregation another opportunity to know Jean. They were able to grieve and bury her in the knowledge that her final years had been full. After nearly everyone had departed from the simple gathering of coffee and cold cuts after the funeral, Bert got to tidying. When the last table was wiped, Bert began briskly shutting off the lights. As he flicked off the lights in the narthex, he glanced into the sanctuary, and that's when he saw him. A young man stood in the aisle at the front row looking up at the stained glass. He was tall, maybe 6'3", wearing khakis that seemed too small and a dress shirt that was too big. His hair was shoulder length, his beard red and unkempt. "Hi there," Bert said as he approached, breaking into the young man's moment of solitude. Hi," returned the young man. His face was painted with sadness, even as he returned a cheerful smile to Bert's greeting. "I'm Woz," he said as he extended his hand. "Nice to meet you," Bert said as they shook. They stood together in silence for a few seconds that felt like more. Bert decided for some reason that silence was the appropriate response. Finally, Woz, looking at the stained glass and altar, said, "I can't believe she's gone. It's hard for me to face. You know what I mean?" Finally, it clicked for Bert. "Wait, are you Philip? Are you Jean's grandson?" Yeah, sorry. No one calls me Philip. Only my grandma does, or did. I'm Philip Wozniak, but everyone, like even my family, calls me Woz. It's just a name from high school that stuck. Pausing for a few seconds and collecting himself, he continued, fighting back the tears. Only Grandma called me Philip. Reaching for Woz's shoulder, Bert said, "Well, it's nice to meet you, Woz," and he meant it. Bert was genuinely happy to meet Philip after hearing about him so often at the midweek Bible study. Silence again descended. The longer it sat between them, the heavier it became, the bitter loss of Jean's absence stinging. But Bert's presence was nice. Bert finally broke the silence, saying, "Well, Woz, you're welcome to stay as long as you'd like, and let me know if there's anything I can do for you." Bert assumed that this statement, though genuine, would end their conversation. It would give Woz the space he had sought when he entered the empty sanctuary. Yet, to Bert's surprise, Woz responded almost immediately. "Actually, there is something." "Oh, what's that?" "Well, after Grandma's diagnosis, she always said she had 3 pearls of wisdom she wanted to pass on to me. She told me them over and over to the point that I just stopped listening. But now that she's gone, I think I owe it to her to try, don't you?" "What were they?" Bert asked, now genuinely interested. "She said her pearls of wisdom were, 1, take care of your teeth. The day after she died, it was weird. I called the dentist to make my first appointment in like 3 years. Grief, man, it's crazy." Bert laughed. "Second," she said, save some money. Right after she died and the hospice people took her body, I went to Teddy's for a drink. I just couldn't be alone. I've known the owner, Teddy, since high school. He said he'd help me with saving money. I don't know what that means, like maybe an IRA thing or whatever. He knows about that stuff, so I have the first 2 covered." "Oh, what's the third?" asked Bert. "The third is find God." They shared a look, and Woz continued, "See, I have a beat on the first 2, but the third one..." Eventually, Woz continued, "See, that one I have no clue about. I'm not even sure it's possible. If you asked me 2 months ago, I'd have told you it was stupid. I'd have told you there is no God, or at least no God who takes time to care about me and my feelings or whatever. So I was sure no church could help me find God, but now she's gone, I just feel like I should give it a shot. But honestly, I don't even know where to start." Bert was at a loss for words. He didn't know how to respond. Luke had said that young adults would come for the cutting-edge relevance, but Woz seemed to be looking for something very different, and Bert wasn't even quite sure he could name it. "So I guess my question is," said Woz, "what time is the Wednesday Bible study?" I'm going to end it there. Come back next week to find out what happens next in this story. God bless. Amen.